challenges that it brings along. The objective would be to problematize existing arrangements that have failed to offer emancipatory results for the marginalized dwellers in cities, specifically in neoliberal paradigms that favor the corporate appropriation and monopolization of public resources. The panel focused on this aspect related to urban areas, including the decarbonization and humanization of space and planning, migration, both in and out, living conditions in slums and non-regular settlements, opportunities, facilities, and amenities for the underprivileged, and stakeholding, social capital, and conflict in cosmopolitan settings, among other relevant themes. The chair for this session is Professor Ranjan. Is Hugo Ripetuduma, PhD candidate at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences, Paris. Aditi Gupta is the third speaker for the panel. She is an MPhil candidate at the Center for Political Studies, JNU. The discussant for the session is Tishiya Agarwal, PhD candidate at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU. Pratibha Singh and Yosin Siaria, Angarak Chandelier are the associate coordinators of the panel. Joining us as the rapporteur is Geetika. Without much ado, I request the chair, Professor Datta, to begin with his opening remarks.
Good afternoon, esteemed friends. The panel is on reclaiming the city, urbanization and contestation over urban space. In a lighter way, when we talk about the space, it's particularly being gradually monopolized by gender studies. We use the space when we go to the gender discourses and debates. But there have been a lot of interesting debates and discussions on urban space. If you look at back 1960s, the Marxist sociologist Henry Lafayette. Yesterday, I remember somebody was referring to Henry Lafayette while working on the changes in urban space, the process of urbanization. He started with the concept of production of space. Space is not something which is natural. Space is not which is not given under the capitalist arrangement. This space is both produced and monopolized. So production of space and monopolization of space emerged as very important debates in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And Henry Lafayette, as I say, Marxist sociologist, whom you do not find in a mainstream, mainstream curriculum, either in sociology or in political science or in economics, but he made significant contributions towards understanding the urban process, urbanization, urban process, contestations over urban space. So the production of space, which was published in 1974, subsequently it was in France, subsequently it was translated into English, and it revolutionized the debate on urbanization and urban space. And it was later on picked up by David Harvey. And we are familiar with David Harvey, a Marxist geographer, but we are familiar with David Harvey not for his debates and contributions on urban space, but more for his contributions in postmodern studies, studying postmodern, the conditions of postmodernity, and also capitalism at the current moment. But David Harvey revolutionized this study on urbanization and started with Right to the City, and his most important contribution has been started with Right to the City, then most important have been the Rebel City, which was published in 2012, where he said that right to the city is not enough. We have to talk in terms of justice in the urban space, justice in the city. The whole idea of space, as argued by Lahabo, for that matter, as argued by David Lahabo, is very simple. As we say, private is political. Now they argue that space is political, it's a container of power. We should think that space is non-ideological. Space is also ideological. Therefore, understanding space both as political and also as ideological have been the revolutionization of the debates and discourses and studies on the process of urbanization. This has not been picked up by the social scientists in India today. We had a lot of these studies on urbanization, but not understanding urbanization as both political and ideological. This has become so significant and so penetrating, particularly in the context of the project of smart cities. Robert Hollins, for example, the sociologist, who had extensively written on the smart cities starting in 1970s, 1980s, and also looking at the culture, popular culture in the urban spaces. The Robert Holland's contributions have in a way made made significant contributions how to understand the very notion of smart cities and its linkage with the corporate capital, and how the corporate capital has gradually captured or appropriated not only the elite culture, mass culture in the urban space altogether. Therefore, reclaiming this city at the present context is a very, very important. And also remember, they say, both Lahabo and David have said, that when we thought in terms of revolutions, we thought in terms of revolution being brought about the proletariat and industrial workers and the peasantry. But we need to understand that revolution, if we are taking revolution seriously, it has to start in the urban space, in the context that now the global is becoming urban. Therefore, it is in this context that we have taken up this debate in this panel. But very interestingly, we have three important presentations which are very diverse in nature. A French scholar working here, trying to understand urban as a liberating space, taking Goa and two cities you have picked up, Goa and Bihar. He's working in smaller cities, trying to understand urban space, and it's very interesting. We have also had a pre-conference, pre-colloquium online debate, very extensive debate, keeping in mind that we will not get that much colloquium. We had debated beforehand and almost 2-3 hours debates on it, and he had a lot of interesting ideas. He considers urban space as a liberating space. Then we have Aditi, who is trying to understand the urban space in terms of the interface between the state and the marginal communities. Taking together, we think it will be a very interesting debate, and we have very enthusiastic discussion. Hopefully, we'll be in a position to give you some time. I welcome you all to this debate on reclaiming the city and request Dr. Ghazala Jamil to make some presentations. Remember, doing it because in the previous panel I was looking at the chair. The kind of helplessness. I remember that I was putting time 233, 223, 233, 238, and even then it 240. Anyway, now I invite Hogu Dumas, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, okay, to speak on what does urbanization do to friendship in empirical insights from Goa and Bihar. Okay. Okay. So he has shifted to. Okay. No. His idea is to create friendship. He is not sticking to one place, moving from here to there to create friendship. Okay. No. He has been our friend. Now remake friendship.
Can you hear me? Yes. Yes. Okay, so thank you very much.
15 minutes you have to remember.
Yes. Promise. So, Professor Dotto started this panel talking about Henri Lefebvre. And every citizen, man, woman, poor, rich, to access the resources that the city has to offer. This might be housing, education, jobs, but it's also the right to have fun, and I want to argue also the possibility to forge relationships. So that's what I want to talk about today, friendship. And the point I want to make is that friendship and intimacy in general is a matter of social justice. Indeed, that's what I've observed as part of my PhD thesis, that studying friendship is actually studying inequalities. So my PhD thesis is in two small cities, the city of Margao in Goa and the city of Puringa in Bihar, which is a very special city. And so in both cities, I've observed that, first of all, the poorer you are, the less friends you tend to have. You can see the graph on the left, that the number of close friends is positively correlated with that. But even more striking, I found that in the two cities, women not only had less friends than men, but also their friendship was often less empowering. So I'll let you time to digest information which might be surprising for some of you, but I have two disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that these results come from small cities, so the situation may be very different, accessing financial support, accessing tips, jobs, accessing important information. But, and that was a surprise to me in the study, women also get less emotional support. We ask people, to what extent do you get courage, strength, hustler from your friends? And even for that question, women tended to perform less well than men. And on the right, you can see actually that we also ask the question, how important is friendship to you? And men were more likely than women to find that the friendship carried weight in their life. So you might be surprised that I've decided to compare Goa and Bihar, which are a little bit the minus man in terms of development indicators. And it's true. Although I'm not going to go into details today, but part of my thesis is also to break stereotypes on Bihar and Goa. But it's true. And that's precisely the point I wanted to make. That even though these two geographies feature very different socioeconomic scenarios, it's fascinating to observe that they still have the same inequalities in terms of friendship, whether in terms of gender or social status. So very briefly, my data and what I'm discussing today is based on a survey. I interviewed more than 1,000 adults, men and women, and I also did ethnographic work and in-depth interviews. So I won't have time to go too much into detail, but broadly speaking, what is friendship? It's a very tricky concept to define because all of us in these rooms have a different view on friendship and a different experience. In fact, when Modi ji talk about mitro, when Amitabh Bachchan And Dharmendra sing this song, Ye dosti hum nahi todenge. Or even when Shah Rukh Khan in Kuch Kuch Hota Hai says that Pyar dosti hai. In fact, all these three are talking about different types of friendship. It's not the same. But broadly speaking, I view friendship as a spectrum of intimacy, trust, and also loyalty. At the end of the spectrum, of course, you have your close friends, the people you feel most loyal to and you feel very intimate to. But you also have more casual kinds of friendship, and very importantly, you also have what I would call a more collective form of friendship. So, for example, neighbors doing adda at some street corner. And both in Puglia and in Margao, I've spent time with female neighbors, and it would be very interesting. They would spend the whole day hanging out together. They would be joking around, helping each other, chit-chatting. But they would tell me that no, these are not my friends. They would say, "Hum dosti karte hain, magar hum dost nahi hain." And usually, academia does not include this kind of friendship practices in friendship. But I've decided to include that in my analysis because I felt it was meaningful. And so the key thesis of my research is that women have a more difficult access to close friendship as it is today, but that urbanization is completely changing the rule of the game, and that society is transitioning from convivial friendship to close friendship. So I'm going to explain that in more details. So basically, I see three main barriers to intimate friendship. The first one is structural. It's basically the fact that, on average, women have simply less time and less opportunities, not only to build relationships, but also to sustain them. That's due to restricted mobility, lesser years of schooling, lesser employment outside home. So that's quite straightforward. But there is another element, is what I call the trust deficit. This, we really need to understand that for many people in society, friendship is actually a very risky investment. Because yes, in every relationship we invest. We invest our time, our energy, our emotions, sometimes even our resources. For example, when we buy a cake for a friend for his birthday. And this does not always bring the benefits we expect. Because if you open yourself to someone, if you share your innermost thoughts, your feelings, sometimes your secrets, there is a risk that the moment the friendship ends, this will go against you. And that's really something I've felt in these 2 cities. For some people, many of us, it's not a big deal. That's part of life. Friendship ends, that's okay. But some people can't afford to take that risk. For example, many young girls, and that's not only in Bihar, in Goa as well, were very much scared of gossiping, of gossips, and what could happen if their friends would tell the family or whoever stuff about them. Similarly, in working class settlements, where resources are scarce but shared, limited but shared, getting too close to people can be also dangerous because it's often viewed as an unnecessary complication of daily interactions. And finally, and not the least important, I also view that there is a strong cultural barrier to friendship. Because for many people, friendship is basically pointless, it's useless. The main foundation of life is the family, it's kinship. And therefore, in this context, if you invest your time and your emotions on people from outside home, it can be viewed as suspect or even as objectionable. And again, that's particularly true for women because they are expected to provide more care, more labor work at home. And there is, I think, a quite striking piece of data I got from the survey, is that we asked people, as you can see on the graph on the right, basically, that almost half of the population felt that it was a waste of time for women to hang out with their friends. And what is striking is that you had more women who felt like that than men in Puglia. So that's something which is very much internalized. And of course, you can imagine that in this context, there is a lot of restraint, even sometimes guilt about getting involved into friendship. Now, my data set is suggesting that urbanization is eroding these barriers. Slowly, but it's eroding them. Because as compared to the village, women get more exposure in the city. They study longer, that's a big element. They have more opportunities to mingle, including with people from outside of the community. And the cultural taboo related to friendship is slowly reversing. Basically, friendship is getting more and more normalized. So yes, as I said at the beginning, there are inequalities in terms of access to friendship, but my impression from the data is that friendship is becoming more and more accessible for both men and women. And in fact, it really strikes me, especially in Polonia, that I met several women who felt that they were the first women in their family to ever have close friends. I really think that there is something important changing. Now, it's a bit counterintuitive because the city often, we associate in our mind the city with alienation, with isolation. And even my respondents would often, especially men, would often make a difference between village friendship, which they viewed as authentic, and urban friendship, which they viewed as fake or as material. And it's also true that I've observed that several forms of convivial friendship are disappearing. And here I'm giving the example of the Machan in Purnia, the practice of Adda in Machan. So these photos were taken right outside of the city of Purnia, in a locality called Girtola. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And I found that the social, I've spent a lot of time in this place, and what I've observed, I found it very fascinating because it's a very spontaneous form of socialization. So it's mostly male, of course, but what's interesting is that whoever is passing by, especially when it's hot, you just sit in the shade and you chit-chat. And often you have strangers involved in the conversation, and also often it cuts across caste, as it was the case that day. And it's clear that the Machan, as a structure, as a space, and as a practice, is disappearing from the landscape of Polonia city. You don't see that much the Machan as a place, and you don't view this kind of Adda as much as in the village. Additionally, it's also clear that people tend to put more and more boundaries in their relationships. Take, for example, the practice of visiting your friend's home uninvited, binbulaya mehman. So that used to be, and it's still viewed as, for many people, as really a strong mark of friendship. But also more and more people now are putting barriers and saying that they prefer to avoid that. If you want to come to my house, you tell me before. And I could also mention the fact that from a more physical perspective, the practice of male friendship, of holding hands among men, is also slowly disappearing from what I've observed. So, am I contradicting myself? On the one hand, I said that urbanization is boosting friendship, and now I'm saying that because of urbanization, some friendship practices are disappearing. In fact, what's happening is that it's the texture of friendship is changing. And what I feel is that under the influence of urbanization, people are moving, as I said before, from convivial to more close friendship. And that's quite paradoxical, but my point is to say that individualism actually boosts intimate friendship. You might disagree, and I'll be very happy if you disagree, we can discuss that. But my theory is that as income increases with urbanization, people become more self-reliant, which means that they can survive without other people. In this context, conflict becomes less risky. Basically, if tomorrow you stop being friends with someone, it's not a big deal from a survival perspective. You still have resources you can carry on. But when you have less resources, you need to ensure that you don't break your channel of solidarity. So convivial friendship is necessary to make this channel of solidarity alive, but restraint in terms of intimacy is also required so that you don't jeopardize them. Also, when you get richer, you tend to be more autonomous, and you tend to build boundaries around you to protect not only your privacy but also your privilege. And precisely, this is this space of privacy when you allow someone to enter, which might enable a deeper form of intimacy. And by contrast, the more convivial collective forms of friendship, like the Machan I mentioned before, leaves less scope for individuality to express itself. Give me more space to be myself, and I tell them more things. So that's what I view as individualization, but also somehow deepening of intimacy. And I'm concluding by saying that there is individualization, but not westernization of friendship. I think that's very important to highlight, because from what I've observed, the practice of friendship in India, in Pune, but also in Margao, you still have strong collective components in addition to more individualistic dimension. And of course, convivial friendship is important, it's possible not to have any close friend in your life and to still have a very fulfilling social life. But my belief is that intimate friendship gives access to resources which may not be available with this kind of collective practice. And by that I mean self-validation, self-exploration, and exposure to other ways of thinking. Which is why, to conclude, I believe that intimate friendship matters, which is why I believe it's also a privilege, and which is why I believe its equal distribution in society is a matter of social justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, in the online debate, online discussion, we had a lot of debates, when who proposes that in the urban space, it gives a lot of liberty for friendship. And we are raising questions to whether you are talking about a horizontal friendship or friendship beyond that. In a vertically divided urban spaces, how we conceptualize citizenship, are we talking to the people, to the class or the category you belong to? And I think we'll have a lot of questions on that. Now I invite Aditi Gupta, who is a PhD scholar at LANU, and she'll be speaking on informal settlements and formal settlements, urban poor, and the institutional processes in India. Okay? Aditi, 15 minutes. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss my work, and hopefully I'll be able to share my concerns with all of you here today. I'm grateful that I get to present my work here in this colloquium, the themes for which very meaningfully coincide quite a lot with my research concerns. What I have been mentioning in relation to their themes and concerns, I'm trying to bring into question the binary opposition between legal and illegal, between formal and informal, that needs to be reconsidered in analyses of people's living conditions and states' responses to them. Because this binary works not so much in opposition as it does in approximations and intersections. So the larger sort of core concern I'm interested in has to do with how do we move beyond understanding the legal and illegal, the formal and the informal as separate domains in talking about settlement patterns of the urban poor, and try to understand them in terms of the relations they become part of. And in that sense, I began with trying to observe the most obvious spaces of interaction between the urban poor residing in informal settlements of Delhi and the state-adjacent processes in the city. Since the most accessible of those spaces of interaction for researchers is the doctrinal, one of the frameworks I make use of in trying to understand this interaction is the discursive analysis of policy programs, court judgments, official statutory documentation related to the housing for the urban poor in Delhi. But to the informal, I would have been replicating the demarcations. I would have been replicating them in the terms that they have been in the urban studies that try to think through legal documents and talking about the ways in which claims to housing for the urban poor have been discursively delegitimized. These Delhi-specific urban studies emphasize the narrative of the force of the law, that law exacts a violent force on the urban poor in the way of demolitions and evictions. But the problem I have with these studies is that they do not take into account how the inhabitants of squatter settlements engage with the law on the ground. Which is why I hoped and decided to diversify my analytical framework and research methods to include an element of non-doctrinal approach. Because any study that situates itself with the questions regarding the lives and living of the urban poor cannot situate itself in looking for answers wholly in texts of legality and formality. Therefore, I've tried to look at how the institutional procedures of the state are made sense of by the informally dwelling urban poor on the ground. I've tried to take up case studies to understand the experiences of eviction, displacement, and eventual resettlement of residents of a Jhuggi cluster in Delhi. Let me take a minute to set up the question related to housing for the urban poor in Delhi. I observed that an increasing number of the policy programs and court judgments have been showing considerable interest in legalizing and formalizing the otherwise illegal informal housing conditions in the city. In general, the movement is towards affirming the right to the housing for the urban poor. There is an interest in the right to the city for the urban poor that translates to their right to not be summarily evicted, their right to be resettled and rehabilitated, their right to seek adequate shelter in the city. It is observable in the emphasis on "Jahan Jhuggi Wahan Makan" promises, although it is a matter of concern that demolitions continue to take place even after these reassurances of being allocated a makan in place of jhuggi. So, if there are any clarificatory remarks to be made in relation to this part of my argument, maybe I can take them up in questions. But to adhere to the limitations of time, maybe I could move to the point that builds upon this argument. This argument that there is an interest in bringing the informal, illegal squatter settlements into the fold of the legal and the formal. The problem with these attempts of the state to expand legal formal access to the city for the urban poor is that this access relies on going through elaborate procedures of getting recognized, of getting recorded, of getting reached by the state. So for instance, according to policies like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Bastis, if they want to seek upgradation in housing conditions, they are required to be inspected by agencies and volunteers. They are required to be mapped by geospatial information systems. And access to resettlement and rehabilitation in the event of forced eviction, which is upheld the right of the urban poor in court judgments, that also relies on going through the procedure of detailed survey to establish eligibility of the residents. Further, the problem with an increasing emphasis on adhering to these elaborate procedures of the state is that the procedures are intended towards recognizing and reaching the otherwise unrecognized and unreachable urban informal settlements. A certain sense of legibility is superimposed in the lives of urban poor in the process of their claiming formal resettlement. So the argument here draws parallel with something Dr. Kamal Chaubey in yesterday's discussion also talked about in relation to the violence of categorization. The violence of categorization manifests as much in who gets included on what basis. It also manifests in as much in who gets excluded with what consequences. That even though being documented and made reachable and accessible by the state may come to mean access to housing for some who are marked as eligible for resettlement and rehabilitation, it is bound to come to mean endangerment to most. So carrying out of survey post eviction, for instance, not only identifies the benefactors of the policy for rehabilitation and resettlement, it also positions the survey to self-identify as having put down their duties illegally or informally. Now comes the other half of my research findings, where I try to understand the ways in which the urban poor navigate this terrain of legibility that is superimposed on them by the state in their trying to resettle in the city, in their trying to reclaim the city. The existing range of theories have tried to explain this navigation in terms of the politics of negotiation that the urban poor make vis-a-vis the procedures of the state. A major departure from this existing literature on negotiation politics of the poor that I try to make relates to how these legibility making practices hold as much the possibility for the poor to recognize and reach the state as it is the other way around. What I found is that in trying to negotiate with the procedures that seek to bring them into the fold of the legal and the formal, the urban poor residents have to resort to a wide range of illegal, informal, or extra legal and extra formal practices. Infrastructure. Their accounts help in thinking about the politics of the poor that is concerned with securing improvement in the conditions of their well-being, for which they engage in all sorts of mechanisms, whether it be legal or formal, illegal, informal channels, extra legal and extra formal. Whatever grid of possibilities allow them to reclaim the city as a place where they could belong to. For instance, one of the ways in which the two accounts differ in their experiences post-eviction is in the resettlement. While one finds relocation through navigating the marketplace of formal housing, for which she has to engage an informal broker to make property deals to be able to afford a market-facilitated housing, the other follows a more ambiguous pattern of legally vying for the access to the state's resettlement scheme, and also auto-constructing a juggi in the colony where the plot should have been allocated to her. For this, she holds on to legal markers of identity such as ration cards, even with an address to an illegal juggi, which is considered as vital in staking a claim on state provisional housing. For her, petitioning the court to legally recognize her right to be rehabilitated is what makes sense in the realization of a place in the city. Both had to calculate when, where, and how much they had to act in or out of accordance with the law to access what they need from the state, what they want from the social formal order or from the market. A calculated sort of functional use of illegality and informality in navigating their claims, formal housing and resettlement in the city is what can be found in these accounts. So the accessing of eligibility is not only comes at a cost, but it comes through a calculation of their agency. The strict binary of legal, illegal, formal, informal also gets subverted in the sense that in the narratives of these they have on those duties. So it was baffling for them to be told by officials that they had violated the law, because why would the government give them food benefits if it did not recognize their address as legitimate? Which makes one think that perhaps could not be considered as entirely illegal and informal if they have gone through supervision of formal and legal channels, if they have been processed by the state and the market forces in some ways. Moreover, in negotiating with the survey-imposed legibility process of the state, the practices resorted to by the urban poor lead to a certain blurring of lines between legal, illegal, and formal, informal. What some may have even been calling as extra-legal. So what movement formal, everything involved undergoes a change, and the is one able to access welfare, which also informed her decision to stay as close to the state processes as possible. In concluding sort of sentences, I would say that cities are reclaimed by the informally dwelling urban poor in the ways that they come to relate with the state, in the ways that they come to know about the state processes themselves, and cities are reclaimed by them through a calculation of where, when, and how they contest with the procedures of the state, and when, where, and how they refuse contestations with the state.
Okay, thank you very much. I agree to be a bit positive, but then, that will also give some time for the audience to raise questions. Now, this is very interesting that the contestations have been multi-layered. I was working on, I have completed a project on contested urban space, the street vendors in Bangkok and Guwahati, trying to understand the state policies on the urban poor, particularly street vendors. Now, if you look at, it's very interesting. There have also been contestations between judiciary and the executive. Judiciary, executive, and the legislature. In 2014, Indian Parliament enacted a Street Vendors Act, and that's very revolutionary in nature. And it ensures, and that has been possible because of the interventions by the Supreme Court. There have been a lot of courts in Bombay High Court and moving to the Supreme Court of India. It had been a lot of orders, a lot of verdicts that finally culminated in the enactment of that Act, 2014 Street Vendors Act. Now, the Street Vendors Act has a lot of binding provisions that you have to survey the street vendors, and you have to constitute the town vending committees, and you have to create the vending zones. And these are three important components which in a way are binding on the part of the government. And very interestingly, and also ironically, Niti Aayog keeps on publishing reports on the process of implementation, but the results are terrible. And every report says that the governments are not in a position even to complete the surveys. Now, therefore, you have the contestations. Again, the street vendors are moving to the court, having a lot of orders from them, but the executive has refused to implement that. So you have the judiciary on the one hand and executive and the parliament. There have been a lot of contestations. But judiciary has also been in a way facilitating, the kind of displacements here. If you look at the environmental judgments on the industries in Delhi, and Gautam Bhan, for example, has been writing extensively on in Delhi, what is happening in Delhi, and he has argued that the city which is now coming up is no longer the city we used to live. And look at your own cities. When I look at Guwahati city, that no longer remains that city we used to fall in love. It has become extremely difficult to identify ourselves with the city. So there have been a lot of contestations. I was traveling from the airport to Vasant Kund. I was asking the driver how to look at the performance of Kejriwal government in terms of helping the poor. And he was very critical. And he said, until you are living in the informal settlements, you are not getting any benefits out of it. So there are also contestations among the citizens, citizens in a vertically, even that is not vertically, they are very close to the people living in the margin, but for them also this has become very, very critical. So cleaning the city has got a lot of dimensions to do it, and it has become a kind of multi-layered contestations. So with these words, I request DC Agarwal, the discussant, to reflect on it. 5 minutes, 6 minutes? Okay. And I'll not give you any.
Okay. Hello everyone. We had quite interesting 3 presentations. Thank you for that. Before starting, since our topic today is for the panelists, reclaiming the city, urbanization and congestion of urban spaces, I would like all of us to acknowledge that G20 meeting is happening, and we had 1,600 homes demolished, 3,000 eviction notice given, and around 2.5 lakhs in Delhi only has been affected because of these demolition drives. This is by a report by Land Conflict Watch. You all can refer the report. I just wanted all of us to acknowledge that, we are in that space around. While traveling here, also we all noticed that change. And this is also a theme which 2 of the presenters touched upon in their own ways. Now, coming to Dr. Ghazala's presentation, there was so much covered, and I am actually not compatible enough to really comment, so I have questions.
Okay, but limited to 2
Yes.
questions.
So the questions are, firstly, you talked about the template of nationalist urbanization, and how. So I want to know, how has this template changed in the last decade?
Okay.
That is one thing I'm curious about. Also, when you mentioned that how now the popular narrative also asks the questions like, why do the majority cares? And there you mentioned the idea of rationality. It's more clear to the minorities. So please shed more light on that part as well. Now coming to Hugo's presentation, very interesting presentation. Most of us were having laugh during your presentation in the session. But you mentioned that, I'm curious about that in terms of time use, when we talk about gender, especially women, the way they interact with time is very different. And now if we compare the day-to-day activities also, in rural and urban spaces, the life is in most cases less drudgerous in urban spaces than rural spaces in terms of the day-to-day activities one engage in. So can it be also the case that when you saw an increase in number of women friendship in urban spaces, it's because they have more time in a basic sense and not some transformative sense? Secondly, this change from the convivial friendship to increase in close friendship in the urban spaces, can we, I was curious that, can this change, what role does this change brings in claiming your space in the city? In the working class, if this alienation is bringing that kind of strengthening close friendship and not that network kind of a space, then can it be said that this is also the reason that
on behalf of the discussant and also on behalf of the audience, she has already raised 5 questions. And we have another 10 plus 5 questions. And we have another 10 plus 15 minutes in hand. Good time. So I'll request the friends to raise questions. You are? Okay. Yes, yes, go ahead. Only request is that the questions should be short and precise. Now you can have 2 lines.
1 line to each, 3 lines.
Okay, 3 lines altogether.
No,
No, 1 line each, 3 lines altogether.
all together. So, no. But the first question is, Ghazala, you are talking of primordial basis of nationalism, the imagination of nation. But has it been always? Because, during freedom struggle, it was against two-nation theory. The idea of nation, you have referred Nehru. So how your basis of nation, kinship, based on kinship, that excludes minorities, particularly Muslims. So how, is it all along or you just raising a point?
Okay.
A point of time. And the Aditi, we have discussed about the state, the relationship between the state and this urban poor. What is the difference between your narratives and political society of Bharata Chatterjee? I find a lot of similarity. This is a political society and they have a bargaining capacity and the state allows illegality to practice. And last but not the least, you just made a great distinction between Indian kind of friendship and westernized notion of friendship. What do you mean by that? How the friendship are two different cultural settings, different? This is my question.
Oh.
Thank you.
So I'll request that you raise only 1 question, then everyone of you. Don't ask 3 questions by each of you. Yes, please. Yeah. Nupur? Okay. Yes, going by this side? Nupur, yours. Yeah.
Okay, very quick. So my first question is to Ghazala, and at the cost of monopolizing it from gender politics, yesterday we were looking at spaces of exclusion, inclusion, and space. So I just wanted to understand in this very important intervention of nationalist urbanization, where do you see the space for hegemonic masculinity? Do you think it is very intrinsic, or do you think so? I mean, your comments on that. Very quickly to Hugo, brilliant presentation. But yes, your reflections on any kind of friendship forged between men and women in both the contexts.
Okay, good. Yes, please, yeah.
So, thanks. I am Pankaj. So my question is to Hugo, and the question is based on the complaints that most of our friends, when they go to abroad, make, and they make this complaint that we are unable to make friends. So, being a French person, did you find difficult to make friends in Purnia? And the second one is the comment one. Your conception of city and village is undifferentiated, but what happens when we bring the fault lines of caste and religion to the fore?
Done. Yes, please. Yeah.
This is to my friend Hugo.
Wow. Now, this is interesting. All have become Hugo's friend. Okay.
Just a small problematization at the level of definition.
But you have to make it short.
Yeah. You're prefacing it too much. You define friendship as it's a continuum of level of trust and intimacy. I just want to qualitatively, I just want to know that what divides friendship, say from friendly relationship, from a tribal kind of relationship, is the fact that it is based on individuation. It is not based on primordial identities.
Okay.
Right? And if it is not based on primordial identities, or it's a kind of tribalism, then the paradox that you pose, that urbanization erodes the barriers of friendship, is not a paradox.
Okay.
So how do you deal with that?
Done?
Sir,
This side, any more questions? This
Sir,
side?
I have
Yeah.
a
Small question to Ghazala ma'am, but only if you allow.
No, you ask it afterwards. Okay. Please, yeah.
So hello, my name is Rakesh Ranjan. So my question is to Ghazala ma'am basically. So ma'am, when you were talking about the conception of nationalistic urbanization, and we were talking about the twin cities of Hyderabad and Faizabad and Ayodhya. So ma'am, actually the nationalistic point that you made, that is well taken, that it is a kind of nation that is being imagined and city is itself where the nation is imagined. But ma'am, I don't get how you are, how we are putting this example within the framework of nationalistic urbanization, because the name that has been dropped in those two twin cities is the newer name of the city, and the name that has been retained in those two cities is the old name of that city. So how come it is urban then?
Okay, all right. I think no question from this side. Okay, coming to the left. Okay.
Give them chance to answer the
Yes.
second
No,
one.
no, no. Let's take the questions. Okay. Please, please. Yeah.
So my question was to Hugo.
Yeah.
When you talk about friendship, how would you relate it to fraternity, which is a very political constitutional notion in India? So could it be understood then that friendship ingests a certain ethical, moral understanding into the very constitutional?
My question is for Gazalama about how right-wing academia is trying to reinterpret coloniality and decolonial theories to hark back to a certain kind of past that they glorify. Its physical manifestation we see in urban spaces in the forms of wall paintings or installations in parks, especially in times of G20. So to what extent do you think there's an instrumental use of academic theories for this kind of erasure government, as you call it?
Okay. So you please, yeah.
So my question is to everybody, how the idea of urbanization has affected lives of
Vitaji, yeah.
So I thought, Hugo, that in the rural areas, women form deeper relationships than in the urban areas. But your data is showing absolutely reverse trend.
Opposite. Yeah.
Opposite.
Okay.
So this is a matter of
Okay. All right. Yes.
So I'm going to do this very quickly.
Yes.
My question is also directed to Hugo, and I'm again picking from, it seems today I'm agreeing a lot with Saktaman. I'll pick both what Supriya said and what Savita ma'am said. The distinction between community friendship with the collective friendship and the fact that there is individuated non-collective friendship, I think these two are very different, probably conceptual categories that in case of India, I'm not sure if you've kind of looked at them as two different, because there seems to be a certain naturalness to the fact that you have to be primordial, but there's an element of choice with individuation.
Yeah.
And
okay, you have more?
Yes, it's complete your
yes,
question.
with prior permission of the chair, there's only one. I'll probably ask this when I get the chance to. Thank you.
Okay. Now, question from your favorite city, Purnia.
So I thought I had a legitimate reason to ask that. Yeah, I have a feeling, Hugo, that the friendship in Purnia, which was less developed, was much deeper than the friendship in Purnia now. I'm speaking absolutely on the experiential basis. So is it that methodologically, as Jigyasa is also pointing out, is it that sure about it?
With the questions, we have around 7 minutes time, 6 to 7 minutes. 3 minutes to you, and 2.5 minutes to Odile. Okay. Over to you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll be super brief then. First of all, I think it doesn't make any sense to make a distinction between Western and Indian friendship, because there are, between America and France, for example, there will be huge differences. So I'm not getting into this discussion. I think it's not possible. Regarding, I'll go maybe to the question regarding the fact that friendship seems to be deeper in rural areas. That's not what the data says, and not my data. In the last 5 years, there has been 3 large case studies in Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, and Uttar Pradesh, and they all show a very strong social isolation of women. And I'm not even talking about friendship, I'm talking about contact outside home. In the of classes, upper class will have even less social contact, but from the data available to us in India, it seems that the isolation is stronger in rural areas. Regarding your point, actually this is also a paradox I'm facing, because yes, I would often hear people saying that friendship used to be more intense. And in fact, a movie like Sholay shows that, you know, this super strong friendship between 2 men, almost bordering the romantic side of it. And no, this is true. And this is something I'm thinking about. I think men and women might have a different experience of that. Young girls would, for example, tell me that it's true that in the village the friendship is super intense. Again, we spend a whole day together. But in the city we have maybe more space and it's maybe more liberating. So this is a paradox, you're right, that I'll try to explore.
You will take the other questions over tea?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now over to tea. Okay.
Right, so coming to our discussions in your original first. So I think I would like to talk about one of the observations I got to make in my field. If I need to talk about actions in terms of evictions between state and the urban poor, one of the ways I got to know about how the eviction becomes a moment where state comes to know about the urban poor. That is one, we all understand that part. But it is also the moment where the urban poor comes to know about the state's intention of evicting them. So legibility making practice, which is eviction and the survey, are also mutual in so many senses. And coming to the, how my analysis is different from Partha Chatterjee's analysis, I am critically engaging with the Chatterjee's analysis, and the way I do that is by sort of critiquing the way the formal and the informal are constituted as separable domains in Chatterjee's analysis. I want to make parallels between and relations between those what he calls as separable domains, in the way that when he tries to say that state wants to know about the urban poor or the poor in general, I have tried to argue that the urban poor also makes the attempt to know about the state, and more substantially when Chatterjee talks about the fact that the marginalized sections are relying on state for their necessitous survival, I have sort of observed that they are relying on state for their well-being rather than their necessitous survival. Yeah, I'll take the other question.
Over tea. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you the speakers and audience here for the very engaging discussion, and I think we have come up with a lot of new insights that will help us to go deeper into our studies. Okay, now we'll break for tea. Okay. Vote of thanks. You are proposing? We can do it over time, over tea. Okay. Now let's share. Okay.
Just we will